going on, everybody?
Hey, man. Welcome to Media Day. Obviously, bit of homecoming. How are we feeling this fight week?
I feel absolutely amazing, man. There's obviously like a lot of crossover between this fight week and previous fight weeks, but it stands out as a very different fight week in a couple obvious ways. Like, I live down the street, or my parents live down the street, 40 minutes away. So I'm staying at my parents' house pretty much all fight week and driving in the mornings and, having dinner and coffee at my parents' house and getting to do our nightly workouts at one of my home gyms, the Grappling Garden in Hamilton. I've got all my coaches with me. They're sleeping in their own beds, and it's you get that feeling of walking into the hotel where you like get engaged and you feel the switch kind of turn on, where there's like 20 high-level cage fighters staying in the same hotel, and it's a little bit tense. You walk into a little bit of the lion's den, and there's a bit of that like, okay, are people going to be cool? Are people going to, are we going to get in each other's faces? There's like a little bit of that tension, and something big's about to happen on Saturday, but I get to feel that and feel the energy and then shut it off and go home and reset for the next day. It's a really nice feeling.
Yeah, is there something a little bit surreal about that, walking into a room full of killers, knowing you're going to go out there in front of an arena of screaming fans and then going home to mum and dad's right after?
Yeah, it's pretty cool, man. I mean, I'm sure the fight will be done so late on Saturday night that I'll probably stay at the hotel Saturday night, but the work will be done by then, man. I'll have my 11th win and my 11th stoppage by then.
Nice. And you were fighting Neil Magny, right?
Yes.
Big name. He's this guy that I think everyone in the sport sort of respects and recognizes as a tough test, Do you look at him as that, and do you think, hey, this is the perfect guy at this point in my career to just prove that I'm not just another guy to make up the middle of the ranks, but I'm here and I'm coming for the top?
I think it's the most juice for the squeeze in the division. I kind of compare it to my debut where I fought Mickey Gall. So, like, you're making your debut in the UFC, you're normally fighting like another Contender Series guy or an Ultimate Fighter winner or something, someone who's probably not super well known. Instead, I'm getting the most well-known guy for the position I'm in, fighting a guy who's got more experience in the UFC, but everyone seems to know him. He's established in the division. He's hard to put away. He's tough and durable, but I've made a career of finishing tough, durable guys, right? Like, you look at my last 5 fights, all at welterweight, I beat all 5 of those men in ways that they've never lost before, 2 of whom were undefeated. I beat them and submitted them, was the first man to beat them, stop them, and submit them. Mickey Gall, I was the first guy to knock out on the feet. Johan Lainesse, I was the first guy to submit, and Adam Fugit, I was the first guy to submit. So I've fought tough guys my whole career, and I've made a career out of doing things to people that they think can't be done to them.
Is there even an extra sort of motivation to do that? Because his last fight, right, he was beaten, but he was never put away. And if you do that, go out and put away, it's just like, hey, look how tough he was last time, and I still managed to do that.
That doesn't really matter to me, man. His previous performances or really who I'm fighting isn't significant to me. I see number 13. That's what I see. I see an opportunity for me to beat this guy, stop this guy, and get a number beside my name. And once I've got that number beside my name, I'm on the ladder and I can start my climb.
One quick one right here. I was speaking with Andre Fili earlier this week, and
my boy.
He said that you might be the best fighter he's ever trained with. So I'm curious, what do you make of comments like that from your training partners, and what do you think separates you from, because Alpha Male and all those guys they train with, just over the years, killers have come through there.
It means a lot to me to hear that, especially from a guy who I really respect. Like, he's been in the UFC for a decade now, right? He's got 20 fights in the UFC. He's someone I've looked up to for a long time. He's got a ton of experience. I've been able to share his training camps with him and corner him in fights, and he got to corner me in one of my fights. So we've been through a lot together. So to hear a compliment like that from him, I know he wouldn't just say something like, he's not the kind of guy who's just going to throw out compliments for no reason. Like, it means a lot to hear that from him. And all my Alpha Male brothers, I miss those guys. I love those guys. Like, I'm in a new chapter in my life where I'm living and training back home in Canada, and it's something that I'd been wanting for years. Like, I'd been homesick the whole time I was living in California. I loved my time in Sacramento and with Alpha Male, and I hope to go down and see those guys again soon. But I'm happy to be back in Canada, but I miss all those guys. They're a room full of killers, and the experiences I got from that room and from training with those guys and from traveling the world, cornering and coaching and fighting with those guys, is like memories I'll carry on for the rest of my life.
Mike, Neil Davidson from the Canadian Press.
It's good to finally see your face, man. I talked to you on the phone like 8 times, dude.
When you were in Vancouver, you capped off a 6-0 sweep by Canadians. As you know, there are a lot of Canadians on this card. What do you think fans are going to see from the Canadian content? How would you rate the Canadian mixed martial arts scene today?
I mean, 6-0 in June speaks for itself, right? Like, we put on an unbelievable performance last time. If we've done it before, we can do it again. I really like the way the contenders are looking right now. It seems like there's a lot of momentum and energy and buzz in the Canadian MMA scene where we're really starting to believe in ourselves again, kind of similar to how we were when George was on top, right? That inspired that next wave this wave of kids, right? Like I was, I had a George St. Pierre poster on my wall when I was in high school, right? Like I idolized this man. And so we're seeing now finally like kind of this wave that he influenced. And I think the tide is starting to rise for all of Canadian mixed martial arts. You see it like high tide rises all ships, right? Like I can really see all of us making a great run in this sport.
Mike, right here, down to your right. You talk about kids being inspired and then you having this short drive down the highway to Toronto. Growing up as Canadians, a lot of us dream of playing at the Gardens or the ACC. Is this kind of the MMA equivalent for you of finally being able to fight in Toronto?
100%, man. So, like you said, we're fighting at Scotiabank, but everybody knows this is the ACC, right, man? Like, I've said it a couple times this week, like the best day of every year when I was a kid was the day, my dad would come home from work and be like, all right, put the books down. I got tickets from work to go see the Leafs play tonight, like you and I are going, and go into that arena and just seeing these like men who seemed like superheroes to me as a kid, just skating unbelievably quickly, hitting each other like we're super physical, fighting on the ice. Like seeing that in person is completely different than watching it on TV. And it's similar with fighting. So to get to represent my country and fight in my country in like this stadium, because this is the stadium to me. There's like a lot of great stadiums in the world. There's Madison Square Garden, O2 Arena, Staples Center, whatever. But like the stadium to me is Scotiabank Arena, ACC. Like this is our home. So getting to fight in this arena on a main card of a pay-per-view in the UFC for my ranked position, like, dude, it doesn't get any better than this.
And I know you said it's a number next to his name that matters, but he is also the welterweight wins leader, the welterweight fights leader. I mean, is that kind of an extra feather in your cap, the cherry on top, so to speak?
Yeah, it'll be excellent to have that under my belt. Like you said, an extra feather in my cap. So, I respect the guy. He's a solid fighter. Doesn't really matter to me, man. I have fought tough guys my entire career, and it tells me I'm doing the right things by fighting tough guys. The way I see it is moving forward, every guy I should be fighting in the rest of my career should be the toughest guy I've ever fought.
Thanks.
Mike, on the left, you just talked about fighting at Scotiabank Arena, what that means to you. You're fighting in front of a home crowd. This is your first-ranked opponent. You're being dubbed as Canada's next big rising star. How have you kept that pressure from getting to you?
Again, man, what pressure, dude? Like, I've got how many on Saturday night I'm have 20,000 people chanting for me and screaming my name. Like, that's support, not pressure. This is privilege, not pressure. I've been wanting to do this my whole life. I feel like it would be pressure if like I didn't want to do this and someone is like, you're going to get in a cage and have to fight a guy. I'm like, what the fuck? I don't know how to do that. Like, this is something I've spent the last 20 years preparing to do and visualizing and in my mind manifesting. Like, I was just a kid from Waterdown, Ontario, Canada, who started training like karate and taekwondo at 14 and was like, I'm going to find a way to fight in the UFC. Like, this is what we have in town right now, and I'm going to do everything I can, and I'm not going to lose focus of this goal. And like, I'm making this happen. This isn't pressure at all. This is privilege. Like, I feel empowered by this. I feel energized by this. I don't feel like there's anything holding me back. I feel like there's only things lifting me up.
You have had an entire arena on their feet for you in Vancouver. With this being such a hyper-local crowd for you, have you imagined what that's going to be like?
Of course, yeah. I've spent a lot of time visualizing what the crowd's going to be like, and I work with my mental coach, Big Danny Patterson, and we go over a ton of mental exercises to, again, use that energy as fuel and to help me rise up, rather than some people you see get under those bright lights and they get jittery and they're like killers in the gym and they freeze into that moment, right? So I feel like it's like fire. You can let it burn you, or you can use it to help you, right? Like this is something I've done again and again as far as using pressure to perform to my fullest potential. And I think being 11 wins on Saturday night with 11 stoppages is only going to like further prove that I can fight really well in those moments.
Mike, go ahead, John.
A quick one for me, Mike, is that when you transferred and looked at this as a career for yourself, can you isolate a time when, in your mind, the UFC became an achievable goal for you, when you felt that I am at this level, that I can make it in the UFC, and went from hobby passion to I can make a living and at the biggest promotion?
We can call it delusion, but there was always like a sense in my mind that I was going to do this without any purpose. You know, trained at Alpha Male for a long time and talked about, Uriah Faber used to give us speeches all the time. And one of the things he talked about is he's like, there is like a healthy amount of delusion that's necessary in order to do this, because it's not like a reasonable thing to say about yourself that you're going to be one of that you're going to be fighting in the UFC. And like, I certainly didn't have like a path. Like growing up playing hockey in Canada, there is a path. You've seen like thousands upon thousands of kids get to the show, and you know what the general path is to get there. It's like, this is kind of like the Wild West, especially when we started getting into this. Like, the sport was far less established 10 years ago, right? So as far as like when did I see myself being a UFC fighter realistically, I mean, since I was 13, 14, and it kind of hasn't really wavered since then. But getting to corner guys in the UFC with Team Alpha Male when I was a coach really helped a lot. You know, I had a ton of UFC fighting training partners, so I got to compare myself to those guys in certain ways and train with them and see like, okay, I definitely am at that level. And then going to the UFC and seeing how other people do this, and seeing what people are doing right and wrong, and kind of taking that and turning into experience and like tools for me, really helped me kind of map out my own path, you know?
Hi, Mike. Just a couple of questions over here. Just talking about Neil Magny again. When you're preparing for him, is it hard not to compare his impressive resume to your past year opponents, who are tough guys, but obviously don't have sort of the UFC tenure he's had? Does that factor in at all when you're preparing?
Not really. I mean, again, I focus on myself. He's probably the toughest guy I've ever fought. Like I said, everyone moving forward will be the toughest person I've ever fought. So the last guy I fought was the toughest guy I've ever fought, and I had probably the best performance of my career to date. And I feel like each performance moving, since getting to Contender Series has been the best performance of my career. So, the tests are just going to keep getting bigger, and I'm going to keep rising above them.
And Mike, you fought in Ontario, BC, Nova Scotia, Alberta. What's the next province that you want to fight in, or do you want to get the chance to fight outside of North America for the first time?
Ideally, no, man. Ideally, we're fighting at home from now on, dude. I got spoiled in Vancouver, and feel like I'm getting spoiled here. If I could make a call for anything, I would love Halifax, Nova Scotia.
Yeah, one more. Mike, you made your professional debut on April 16, 2011. Exactly 2 weeks later, UFC 129 was held at the Rogers Center, headlined by GSP and Jake Shields. Till this day, that's the largest North American crowd in UFC history. What do you remember about that 2-week stretch? I can imagine that was an inspiring time for a Canadian trying to break into MMA.
That was incredible. So I was at that event. My dad got us tickets. And yeah, I had just made my professional MMA debut, first MMA fight. And so getting to feel how that arena felt, feeling what 60,000 people in a live arena feel like, and seeing guys from this area, Claude Patrick, Mark Bocek, Mark Hominick, George St. Pierre, not from this area, but from Canada. All these guys walk to the cage, and like watching them walk out, and I'm like, that's that guy right down there. I'm way up in the, upper deck, upper bowl, so they're pretty small down there, but I can see them. Like, I see them physically walking to the cage, and I can watch them fight right there. Like, it was extremely inspirational just to see, like, look, man, if these guys from this area can do this, so can I. I feel like the more local representation we have in the major shows, the more it inspires the next generation, and it just snowballs.
Hey, Mike, sorry, before you run, I want to ask, your 2 fights for the main event, do you have a pick between Strickland and Duplessis?
I'm focused on myself, man. I'm sure it'll be an amazing fight, and once my fight's done, I'll whip around and watch it, because I'm sure it's going to be an absolute banger, but I'm focused on the task at hand.
A quick one back here. Jeff Neal is facing Ian Gary in February. Would you like to see the winner of that fight?
Sure. Again, I'm focused on what's ahead of me, which is my opponent on Saturday night, UFC 297. I'm looking to climb after that. So I'm only really looking at guys that are ahead of me. So if one of those guys is ahead of me, bring it on.
Thank you.